Hi everyone, Stephen D. And today I want to talk about a blog post I wrote yesterday on caucus99percent.com and also shared on Reddit at Cossacks for Sanders in the Way of the Bern. Title of the piece was, "No, this is not effing okay. I don't care who you supported." It was about the story of my online writing coach, or former online writing coach, although I'm still using her service. I'm just being coached by a different person at this point in time. Her husband, in fact. The link will be, to that post describing what happened to her will be below, but the bare facts are she was assaulted while she was walking her dogs by a man wearing a red hat that said, "Make America Great Again." He tried to kick one of her dogs. I guess he was upset the dog was in his way. She got in front of her dog, kicked her instead, then grabbed her by the shoulders, threw her down on the ground, and then made a statement, in effect, saying that, you need to get back and you need to know your place, woman. She posted it on Facebook. She was very traumatized by what happened to her. And she also reported what happened to her to the police. In my post about her story, I linked to the Facebook post and to the story where the police were investigating, and to the local story where she was interviewed by local media about what happened to her. A lot of people, were very generous and kind and so forth in her comments about what happened to her. But others questioned why she went on Facebook and why I wrote about this incident. So I'm here to tell you why I wrote about it, because I gave it a lot of thought, because there was a lot of pushback, and this was not pushback from the right. This was pushback from people on, what I consider, or what other people would consider, the far left, progressive websites, the, lefty fringe. Okay, the reason I thought about this a long time last night, and so I decided to tell my story, and I hope that it sheds some light, not only on why I posted the story, but also shed some light on why all of us need to respect, what's happening in our country right now, and what's the violence that's ongoing, not just in the wake of the election, but on a daily basis. Because you see, I was once assaulted. I was physically assaulted twice. This was a period of time in my early 20s. I was at that time exploring my sexuality at the encouragement of my second wife, and that was when I was discovering that I was bisexual. I was going to gay bars. I was living in an area of Denver called Capitol Hill, which in the late 70s, early 80s was a place where there was the highest concentration of gay and lesbian and so forth people. The term LGBT hadn't yet, come into play. Nobody really knew about it. And so I'm going to tell you about those two incidents right now and how they impacted my life. First incident was when I had gone to a gay bar, and when I did that, I dressed up. I wore makeup. I had longer hair then, curled it, give myself a more feminine appearance, and I wore camisoles and other female clothing to increase that feminist or feminine appearance. And a man at the bar, or at the club, it was really a dance club and bar. It was one of the, I think it was the largest gay bar and club at that time in Denver. You know, man in a suit, business suit, picked me up to take me out to his, take me back to his place. And we got in his car, and then suddenly he was beating the shit out of me. He was hitting me, kicking me, calling me the usual names you'd expect. And he ended up literally kicking me out of his car. I landed on the asphalt in the parking lot. It was a very expensive car. I believe it was BMW or something like that. And then drove off. And this was the parking lot across from the club, where there were a group of police officers who always were in attendance. And I did not go and talk to the police officers. I had been warned by people in the past that they were not sympathetic to gay men. Their job was to intimidate people coming into the club. And whether that was true or not, I believed it. And so I gathered my things about me and walked back to the apartment house that I was living in, which was about a distance of maybe 3 or 4 blocks away from where the club was. Maybe a little further, I'm not sure. So, but that didn't, I continued to go to gay bars. I just became much more paranoid about what was going on. The second incident that occurred, in which I was assaulted, was more serious. A lot more serious. My wife was away. My second wife was, we divorced eventually, but this was before we divorced. Was away for the weekend. I think she was unhappy with what she was seeing in me, and I was rather not very cognizant of her her issues with it. But she'd gone away to spend some time alone with her friends, and so I had been doing some drugs at that time. Recreational drugs were a big part of my life. This again, I was probably 22, 23 at the time. And I woke up, I was hungry, and I went down to get into the car that we shared. It was her car, but she left it for me to use since I needed it to get to work. And this was my day off. I drove the car out to go to the local McDonald's. On the way, a white van pulled over and cut me off. I honked my horn. I was pretty upset. I passed, immediately passed the van, just to show these people that this wasn't right. And I guess they didn't appreciate that. They again cut me off, and this time I rear-ended their van. It wasn't a major accident, but it was enough, that I was stunned. The vehicle I was driving didn't have seat belts, or I wasn't using them anyway. This, Volkswagen Beetle from the late 60s. And as I was searching for my ID and the registration to the car, suddenly a man's face appeared in the window. Heavily bearded, white man. That's all I remember. For a while anyway. Next thing I remember was being kicked and laying on the ground, and the man, I saw the boots that were kicking me. They were snakeskin boots. Denver, Colorado. A lot of people wear, at least back then, wore cowboy boots, and he was wearing what we used to call shit kickers, but these were pretty fancy. Then I was unconscious. I went unconscious. I woke up in Denver General Hospital. I was told that a taxi driver nearby had stopped, had seen what was going on among another group of people, and he had called his radio dispatch. Nobody intervened personally to stop these men from beating me. They probably would have kept at it until they were satisfied. I don't know. But he called police. He called his dispatch. The cab company called the police. And when the sirens started, one of the guys fled. Two of them, however, were caught and arrested. Meanwhile, I woke up in the hospital. Obviously, I'd had a concussion, but I'd also suffered a number of cuts, and I was being stitched up. That's the first thing I remember. And when I was done being stitched up, they did a brief exam just to make sure that I knew who I was, and then they, released me, or they said, you can go home now. And I didn't have my car, but Denver General Hospital was, within walking distance, and I didn't have, they wanted to get rid of me. They wanted me to get out of the hospital. They had other, Denver General, that's where all the major trauma victims come. People suffered gunshot wounds, knife wounds, whatever. So I started to walk out of the emergency room, took a couple steps, and then suddenly I fell flat to the floor. I don't know, I didn't feel dizzy, I just suddenly, boom. At which point I was admitted to the hospital. Spent about 5 days there, was seen by various neurologists and so forth. Police came by, interviewed me about what had happened, and someone who was a coordinator for victims assistance called me and told me that they needed me to testify at the preliminary hearing for the gentleman who beat me up. Now, I don't know if these guys acted to do what they did because they suspected I was gay or bisexual or whatever. But there's a strong possibility they did. Like I said, the community was well known to be a haven for gay population, and like I said, it had the earlier incident where I'd been beaten up outside the club. So I went in and testified, and it was one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life. It was very frightening because I saw, as I walked in, the man who'd worn those boots, and his face, to my mind, matched the face of the man I'd seen, right before I got pulled out of the Volkswagen. Heavily bearded, and the boots were the same. So I testified. There were two gentlemen, like I said. They had been arrested. I identified him as the person that had beaten me. I could not identify the other person that they had arrested, although, they had other people that indicated that, there were more than one person involved in this. But no other witnesses were close. And then I was let out. The defense attorney really didn't ask me many questions other than, whether I'd been admitted to the hospital, was it true I'd, suffered, I'd been unconscious, and of course I had to say yes. He also asked me if I remembered flipping these people off. I said no, I did not remember that. To which I believe the DA objected because it's not really relevant to whether these people had a right to beat me up or not. They didn't. After giving testimony, I was escorted out by the victim's assistance individual who'd been assigned to me, and was told I'd done well and that they would get back in touch with me when it was time to take the case to trial. And then I didn't hear back from anyone for several months. And in the meantime, of course, I was going through a lot of post-traumatic shock. They didn't call it PTSD back then, but I was experiencing episodes of anxiety and panic and paranoia. I was looking over my shoulder a lot. I was afraid to go out. I stopped going to the gay bar that was close. It was very difficult, frightening, like I said, time for me. I think anybody who's been assaulted or victimized and beaten up, regardless of whether it was individuals or not, or the police or whomever, you don't get, you know what I'm talking about. You don't get over that kind of stuff. So I eventually called this victim's assistance person, and she informed me that the police or the prosecutor decided not to take the case to trial because, and then she informed me the reasons. The reasons were that the other two victims, or the other two people who had been arrested, pointed at the man who'd gotten away. Now, they all had lengthy criminal records. They were all white. They were all had some association with either the Aryan Brotherhood or some other sort of, white national supremacist groups. They'd all had served some time in prison, but the guy who got away was the one who had the worst record. So the prosecutor made the decision he wasn't going to waste his time trying to arrest these people when there was no clear, identification other than me, and I was, in his mind, I guess, a compromised witness. And that was terrifying all over again, because now I knew that these 3 people were still out there, and I had no idea where they might be, where I would run into them again. You can't imagine if you haven't been. You just can't imagine. I'm sorry if you haven't been a victim of a crime like that. So, after a few years, after my divorce from my second wife, after I lost my job due to many things, but related to my abuse of recreational drugs, I moved back in with my parents and driving a taxi, and began studying to go to law school, which I got admitted into law school. Met my third wife, the wife I've been married to for 30 years, in law school, and basically tried to put that part of my past behind me, not think about it, I decided, and then there were a lot of reasons that went into that. Obviously, that this was during the height of the AIDS crisis, and I had myself tested, and I had a false positive come out, which I had to then inform my then girlfriend, and now, like I said, my third wife, and it was very frightening until we did a second test, which said that no more, a better test, which is no, I did not have AIDS. And I made a choice. I made a decision that I was no longer going to explore that part of myself. I was involved in a relationship with a woman. I cared about her. Ended up marrying her, had 2 children, and for a lot of years I just didn't think about that period of time. But it doesn't go away. You can repress those memories all you want, but they don't go away. After I became disabled and started writing on political blogs, oftentimes the stories that attracted me the most that I wanted to write about were those where people were suffering the effects of violence, whether it was violence in war or violence committed by the police, or just, hate crimes in general. I mean, that wasn't the only topic I blogged about. If you followed me at Daily Coast when I was posting there, or at Boom and Tribune when I was posting there, but it made up a significant number of my stories. And then again, when Ferguson happened, and first Trayvon Martin and then Ferguson, I wrote a number of stories about those because it triggered memories of what had happened to me. And I guess if I have a bias, it's always in favor of the person that's been victimized, the person that has, been harmed, who suffered. And I had spent many years living the life of what appeared to be a straight male family man, right? But that didn't mean I'd forgotten. I put those memories, bad memories from being victimized and beaten up, push them aside. But whenever I saw one of these stories, it would trigger a reaction in me, a response, whether it was people that were being beaten up because they were gay, or because they were African American, Hispanic, whatever. And I especially wrote a number of stories at the time when Sean King came on board at Daily Kos and was hired by Marcos Melitos, the owner of that site, and particularly to write about the Black Lives Matter movement and issues regarding use of police violence. But I'd also written stories, about violence that was asserted against or that was employed against the people, in the Occupy movement. Any time I saw people being brutalized unfairly and in my mind unjustly, again, like I said, I was attracted to those stories, and I'm not even sure I was always aware why they brought such heightened emotions to me. But last night, thinking over everything, it became apparent to me that this was the reason. So this is why I posted about my friend. And unfortunately, I didn't communicate that fact about myself and why I was writing about it, why this mattered to me. And when people were critical of her for posting to Facebook, in fact, one person flat out on Reddit said, I don't believe her. Why? Because she posted to Facebook? This lady is a writer and runs a writing workshop. That's her business. That's her life. She uses Facebook as a means of staying, as a means of promoting her own books that she's written, and as a means of promoting her business. But she also posts about her family and about the things that happened to her. Like a lot of us, social media came along and suddenly everybody's posting stuff about themselves. I never really did a lot of that. I didn't use Facebook in that way. I just mostly used it to keep in touch with my relatives, because we don't live very close to them. But so I don't really know the whole thing about of people posting stuff to Facebook that has lots of political aspects to it. I got all the political stuff out the blogs anyway that I was writing on. But I understand exactly why she wrote what she did after this happened to her. She was traumatized, and she's a writer, and so that's what she did in that moment of trauma and shock. She wrote something on Facebook. She blamed or called out people who voted for Trump, particularly women who voted for Trump, in that Facebook post. Now later she did an interview on television. It's broadcast on television, which I also linked to and also included her comments, in which she said that no, she didn't blame Trump voters. That and she was calmer now. This was probably 5 days after the incident or so. Even though in her posts on Facebook she expressed how terrified she was of doing the interview and wasn't even sure what she'd said or if she'd said the right thing. But in the interview that they, actually showed, she came across as very calm, very reasonable, saying she didn't blame Trump voters, but she did believe that the rhetoric in our country, the political rhetoric, and she named Trump by name, was, she believed, responsible for what's been happening. And let's face it, there has been an outbreak of violence against people on all parts of the political spectrum. Women, gay men and women, LGBT people. I saw a story the other day about a Chinese man who'd immigrated here and had never before had a problem, and suddenly he was, being threatened and having his property vandalized because he was Chinese. And I know that Trump, people who've been wearing Trump gear, like the red hat with the Make America Great, or other sayings, have also been attacked, violently attacked by people. So there's a lot of this going on, and there's a lot of reasons. But I'm just want you right now, if you're watching this, to understand that I don't really care that much about the reasons. What I care about is that we stop the violence. And the only way that's going to happen is if we start seeing people as people. I know lots of people, members of my own family, who are prejudiced and bigoted against various groups, including African Americans, even though and frightened of African Americans and the violence that could occur, even though they've never experienced anything like that. And let me tell you, that bothers me. It bothers me that so many people in our country have been divided and broken up into these little groups and told we need to be afraid of X, Y, Z people because they could hurt us, or they're immoral, or they're bad people. And if I blame anyone for that the most, it's the media, which has sensationalized this aspect of our society. No society's perfect, but hate crimes do occur, and they do have very traumatizing effects on people. Just like women who've been raped, or men who return from the wars that our government has fought in the Middle East and is still fighting in the Middle East. You cannot be placed in situations where you see violence, or you participate in violence, or you are the victim of violence employed against you, and not come away without a great deal of trauma and scars to your psyche. And so I'd like everybody who's watching this video to understand that what I really wanted to communicate, and didn't do a good job of it obviously yesterday in my blog post, but what I really want to communicate is this is wrong. Attacking people, using violence as a means to intimidate any group of people, any person, based on our own stereotypes or beliefs or whatever is wrong. And if you haven't been a crime victim, you haven't been a victim of violence, I'm sorry, you just don't have any idea what the effect it has on you, what it does to you. For years, I remained anonymous on the web. And one of the reasons was that back in 2000, before I even knew about blogs, before blogs existed, I wrote an op-ed piece in our local newspapers. This was when McCain was going against George W. Bush, and he was using the word, he'd been caught using the slur word gook. And since my wife is Japanese American and my children are, biracial, I wrote a piece asking him to retract that statement and explaining that this is a racial slur, and asking all of the candidates, actually, at that time, to make a pledge not to use racial slurs. That op-ed piece was printed in the local paper in my name, and I got hate mail, I got telephone calls, threatening and intimidating telephone calls saying, "We know where you live." Basically calling me a, liberal piece of shit. And so for a long time, I was anonymous on the web. I did not reveal my true name. But a couple of years ago, I made the decision to come out and say who I am. This is who I am. My name is Steve Searles. Stephen D. Searles. That's where I got the moniker Stephen D. And I told people about myself, but I didn't reveal this story in any great detail before. This particular story. So for all of you, just take away one thing from this, if you take nothing else away. The people that are being beaten up and assaulted or threatened or harmed in any way, regardless of what end of the political spectrum they might be in, or their gender, or their race, or their, religion, think about them as people, please. People who have suffered something that maybe you don't understand, but it's pretty fucking bad, man. It's pretty fucking bad when this happens to you. And I'm pretty sure that those of you watching this, who had been the victims of violence, have a pretty good idea exactly what I mean. Some people handle it better than others. Some people do what I did, repress it for years. But it doesn't go away. You just get better at being able to live with it, if you're lucky. And right now, my friend who was assaulted and physically pushed to the ground, well, she's going through a lot of fear and anxiety, panic. So try to understand, maybe that's why she wrote the piece. Maybe that's why she posted to Facebook. We didn't have social media back in 1980, 81, whenever these incidents happened to me. I don't know if I would have posted on social media, but this is a different time. So don't condemn her because she posted it to what happened to her. Don't assume you know anything about her. Try to, show a little empathy and understanding for everyone right now who's undergoing these acts of violence. Okay? That's all I'm asking. That's why I wrote the blog post that I did. And that's all I have to say to you. So, Steve and Dean, signing off until next time, whatever that will be. Take care, everybody. Peace. I mean that. Concentrate on that thought. Peace. Bye.